Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus Weekend Edition, powered by the Center Square. I'm Greg Bishop, Illinois editor at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. This week for Illinois in Focus, the Center Square reporter Jim Talamonte and I will discuss the ongoing back and forth about expected immigration enforcement in Chicago, literacy rates taking center stage in electoral politics and in Washington, D.C., and what taxpayers could expect for the upcoming fall veto session. All of that and more when we return for more Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Dominating national news this week is public safety in Chicago, with President Donald Trump saying they're going in, but didn't disclose when. Democratic leaders like Governor J.B. Pritzker are opposing the expected expansion of federal immigration enforcement and are vowing to go to court to stop it as speculation continues how the National Guard may play a role. Joining me to discuss this and more is the Center Square Chicago reporter, Jim Talamonte. Jim, Trump said that they're going into Chicago, but what that means, it's not quite clear at this point.
That's right. One of the reporters who was talking to him during an interview session this week first asked about the National Guard, and Trump talked about some things. Then when he followed up with another question, the reporter didn't specifically say National Guard, but Trump then said, well, we're going in. So does we're going in mean more ATF, more ICE, more FBI presence, or does it mean actual deployment of National Guard soldiers? We're not really sure. Maybe it's going to be something that happens one step at a time. We do know, of course, that with the big, beautiful bill passed, that there's a lot more funding for ICE. They've been hiring left and right. And Chicago has been, I don't know if I'd say ground zero, but certainly one of the ground zeros around the country. And in terms of immigration enforcement, in part, quite probably because of the opposition expressed by Mayor Brandon Johnson, Governor J.B. Pritzker, and they have dug in against the president, and they've both, since January, delivered a steady stream, continual stream of just anti-Trump verbal attacks. And so the president obviously has them in his sights, and so he's going to take it to him, it appears. Again, what that's going to look like, we don't know. There have been reports that there's going to be some kind of deployment at Naval Station Great Lakes, which is north of Chicago, where, federal agents, whoever they might be, or federal government representatives might go from there is anyone's guess. But there's a lot still to be determined. But it's pretty clear that given the amount that the president and the vice president were asked about Illinois and Chicago in particular this week, Chicago's got more national attention, for better or for worse, and then the state of Illinois by extension with Governor Pritzker.
We've got the governor having practically daily news conferences addressing this issue. Just before you and I hopped on here for Illinois in Focus Weekend Edition Thursday afternoon, the governor was in front of a microphone, and he talked about what his understanding is and sources that he's hearing from about the possibility that they'll be fully staged Friday. And then you've got the potential of parades on Saturday celebrating, Mexican heritage, and the questions of whether or not people need to get out there because they're possibly going to see increased ICE enforcement on the streets. And again, this is all according to Governor J.B. Pritzker, who just moments ago before we started recording this laid out that schedule. Jim, it could be an interesting weekend, but with all the pushback there's been from Mayor Brandon Johnson, from Governor J.B. Pritzker, and even Democrats in Congress against the idea of putting federal troops on Chicago streets, you've had residents all up and down for months, if not a couple of years now, saying that the federal government needs to intervene in Chicago, not just for crime, but also for immigration.
That's right. We've heard this from a number of residents. And again, not just this week, but over the past months and even years, people getting up before public comment, before city council meetings or even committee hearings, people talking to reporters. And to be fair, on the other side of it, there have been not only Democrats, but some conservatives have concerns about federal deployments in Chicago for this purpose, and that there's been some couching of that to say, well, this would be for support and for presence, not for actual policing and that kind of thing. But of course, the opponents are saying this is militarization, this is and that kind of thing. But yes, a lot of residents have said we need this, and in particular, there was some polling out this week that showed the only ethnic demographic or the racial demographic, I guess, in favor, or I should say, opposed to the federal deployments would be white people. That Black and Latino residents of Chicago absolutely want the National Guard here because their populations, their communities tend to be more affected by crime and tend to have more crime victims than other communities. So these are the people who are asking for federal help and for the National Guard, in large part because local efforts, despite the numbers we hear from the Chicago mayor and the Illinois governor, to the people in the communities, that's just not good enough. And one of our Republican lawmakers this week is Martin McLaughlin of Barrington Hills, said, is saying that the crime numbers are better right now. It's like taking if you had a temperature of 106, a fever, and it went down to 105. Well, that's it's a little better, but it's still fatal. And so that's where a lot of people on the ground are. But again, the politicians in power, at least in the city of Chicago, almost all are opposed to the president's potential moves.
And one of the stories you can find at thecentersquare.com for Illinois is Chicago residents, we need help from feds to fight crime. Jim, you talked to somebody who is a crime survivor, having lost a couple of people over the past 5 years or so to violent crime.
Yeah, really sad. Shantae Baker, a young lady on the south side of Chicago, talked to me about losing a good friend in June who was shot in the middle of the day on 94th Street in Chicago. As far as she knows, there's been no arrest in the case. Someone just came up to her friend, shot him, and it was a fatal wound. And she had also lost her brother a few years ago. And she didn't really dive into the politics of it too much, but I asked, well, do you think having federal National Guard troops, is that a good idea? She said, well, I just honestly think we need it. We need help because I hear shooting, we're having shootings all the time here. It's not, if not every day, it's every week. And you hear gunshots and you have incidents, and that's aside from the, less violent crime that's still going on that has driven businesses out of the community. And then we still see in downtown Chicago along the Magnificent Mile, businesses are down something like 50%. And so it's a major economic issue in addition to being the even more significant public safety issue. And of course they go together. But yeah, Shantae Baker said, we need it. You can tell there was some pain there. This is someone who's had to deal with it personally, unlike the people in political office who generally, major political offices around here have their security details.
Another story you'll be able to read in the space of public safety, and especially with the expectation of increased immigration enforcement in Chicago and elsewhere across the country, is the headline, Arrest of Mexican National for 2023 Murder, called Long Overdue Justice. You can read that story again at thecentersquare.com. All right, Jim, let's move on to something else that I think has been a big interest for our readers at thecentersquare.com, and that's anything dealing with lawsuits against gun control laws in the state of Illinois. We're anxiously anticipating the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals to hear the challenge against the state's gun ban. That was decided by the district judge last year as unconstitutional. Now it's in the appeals court, and September 22nd is coming up up right around the corner. And while we wait for that, we do have action in a couple of other cases this week, as we reported at thecentersquare.com. Plaintiffs are weighing their next steps after an appeals court sided with the state law prohibiting concealed carry on mass transit. So that is now out of the appeals court and could possibly go to the U.S. Supreme Court. And just last month, the appeals court decided a Cook County gun ban, siding with the county ordinance. So that case is queued up for the U.S. Supreme Court. Jim, it looks like Illinois could be dominating the docket for the U.S. Supreme Court when it comes to questions about the Second Amendment.
Yeah, so this is something you've been talking about and even predicting for months now, that Illinois may become, in addition to being lately the epicenter of the national conversation about potential National Guard and ICE activity, also being the potential epicenter for gun cases. And of course, part of that is because our state traditionally has had some of the strictest gun control or gun restriction measures, restrictions on the Second Amendment, so to speak, over the past couple of decades at least. So it's going to be interesting to watch all of these and how the decisions come down. But it certainly wouldn't be the first time if we got to high levels of the judiciary and Illinois restrictions were overturned, because we have seen that in the case. One of the big ones was, of course, the Chicago handgun ban a couple of decades ago. But yeah, there's definitely more on the horizon, and we'll be keeping an eye on all of those at the Center Square.
No question. Obviously, education, something else that's on people's minds as their kids get full swing back into school. And that's been kind of on the minds of a lot of people here in the first couple of weeks of the new school year. Going from, people talking about the politics of education funding to the outcomes of education and our children actually learning, to even in the halls of Congress, there's been conversation about literacy and whether or not students can do math. Jim, you've touched on this all week with a variety of different stories.
Yeah, this week there's really interesting testimony in a House subcommittee. This was a subcommittee of the Education and Workforce Committee of the U.S. House. This subcommittee devoted to early childhood, elementary, and secondary education. And both U.S. representatives and witnesses talked about science-based literacy and kind of a back-to-the-basics approach for reading and math. And one of the people testifying was from the state of Louisiana, which has had remarkable gains since the pandemic, actually topping the nation in recovery numbers coming out of the pandemic. And their state superintendent, Cade Brumley, talked about the fact that schools are doing so much. And when we look at some of the, school district negotiations, in particular in Chicago, with the Chicago Teachers Union demanding things like electric buses and solar panels. And Brumley said the schools have been asked to take the place of the family, the church, the hospital, the supermarket, all these meals in schools. Now, schools were never ordained to do these things, Brumley said. We need to get back to basic math and reading proficiency, and that's what we're trying to do in Louisiana. There have been great increases in terms of math, and Louisiana used to be at the bottom of the national rankings for math and reading proficiency, and now Louisiana's moved up dramatically. And Illinois U.S. Rep. Mary Miller talked about the economic impact of having people, young people, sometimes even graduating from high schools or dropping out, one or the other, but still not being able to read, being functionally illiterate, she said, and not being able to perform very basic arithmetic. And she said, this is costing our economy billions of dollars in the workforce, where people just need extra help to do basic jobs because they can't read properly or do very basic math. And Miller talked about the spending per student, which is very high in Illinois, and in particular in Chicago. And she referred to Douglas Academy High School, which received nearly $94,000 per student last year. Not one of the school's 35 students could read at grade level. And there have been a number of lists put out, one of them by Wirepoints, listing the schools around Illinois, not just Chicago, where 0 students in a given grade or even in an entire school can read at grade level. And and again, it just shows the importance of getting back to basics of math and reading, and perhaps less focus on other activities, so many other things that school districts and these numbers are all public schools, I should say, not involving your parochial or private schools, but getting back to the basics was part of what this committee was about. And there were a number of witnesses who talked about how they're seeing success when it comes to getting back to the basics of phonics and reading as was taught decades ago, as opposed to some of the perhaps you might say new wave ways of teaching where we've seen U.S. nationwide numbers just drop in contrast with countries around the world.
Be sure to catch up on these education stories at thecentersquare.com/Illinois. And of course, you're tuned in here to Illinois in Focus Weekend Edition. Staying with education, obviously, Jim, you've got the gubernatorial election coming up in 2026. Governor J.B. Pritzker touts that he has increased education spending by more than $2.4 billion since he came into office. I think you're working on a story looking at some other education spending deals, but you've got a potential challenger, Ted Dabrowski. You mentioned Wire Points earlier. He's going to be announcing his candidacy here soon as an analyst at Wire Points. He's looked at these education numbers, and he kind of counters what Governor J.B. Pritzker is saying about the increased funding helping with better outcomes.
Yeah, Ted Dabrowski was president of Wire Points, stepping down to announce that gubernatorial run. I think he immediately becomes a front runner in the Republican primary. And he started listing the numbers in terms of the proficiency of children, in particular minority children around the state who could read at grade level. And the numbers are just atrocious. And so while we've spent as taxpayers in the state of Illinois so much more money on education, the question is, where is it going? Because it's not leading to better numbers. It's not leading to more kids being able to read at grade level or perform math at grade level. In particular, the reading numbers are really poor. And I think we talked last week, perhaps it was the week before, about now the state's lowering proficiency standards. So the next Illinois report card may show gains, but in fact, the students may not actually be able to read any better. They're just going to have testing at proficiency levels set by state government to therefore improve the way things look. But if the students, as Mary Miller said, if they get out of school and get into the workforce and can't read or do basic math, well, it's going to cost the economy millions or billions in terms of productivity on a nationwide level. So Illinois spending more than $11 billion of state taxpayer dollars on K through 12. That's only K through 12 education. I'm working on another story about higher education, where Illinois taxpayers spend more per pupil on higher education than any other state in the union. So whenever it says, well, we're not funding public education enough, boy, the numbers say we're really throwing a lot of money into education. The question is, why don't the results match the dollar amounts?
Another story you had at thecentersquare.com, Jim, I think kind of it shows how priorities might get a bit askewed when you've got Dabrowski, for instance, looking to challenge Pritzker in the 2026 election, saying that everybody needs to obsess about literacy, getting everybody on board, from the unions to the teachers to the parents to the businesses to the volunteers, obsess over literacy to get those numbers up. You had a story about how Chicago Public Schools is paying out a couple of $1 million or so to students that were being forced to do transcendental meditation.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Greg. I forgot about that. Talk about something that has nothing to do with reading or math. This was I talked to an attorney who handled this case, John Mauk, horrendous religious freedom violation in that Chicago Public Schools high school students, primarily, he said, on the west side of the city, were forced to participate in a, quote, quiet time program, which was actually transcendental meditation, pushed by the David Lynch Foundation. And it was Hindu initiation ceremonies, which included everything from offerings to a guru. Students had to repeat mantras with the names of Hindu deities, kneel before pictures of the guru. The attorney said one girl was told if she didn't kneel before the picture of the guru, she could lose eligibility for the girls' basketball team. And of course, students were told not to tell their parents, especially if the parents were religious. Well, some students did tell their parents, and parents got involved. It took a period of years, but eventually the Chicago Board of Education dropped this meditation program and this Lynch group. But more than 200 students filed claims in a class action suit, and those students who are now young adults are receiving checks between $3,000 and $9,400 apiece. The lead plaintiff getting a significant amount more, six-figure, $100,000. But so again, Chicago Public Schools opting out of basic education and going into transcendental meditation, and now paying, well, I should say Chicago taxpayers are paying for that mistake. And it's a six-figure mistake in terms of what's being paid out, over $2 million.
Another area where some taxpayers are going to be asked to pay for things that they may not necessarily be connected to. We'll be watching this closely next month, Jim, when legislators come back to Springfield for fall veto session. They may have a couple of vetoes to deal with, but the big ticket item is how to handle a $770 million fiscal cliff for public transit. Just in a couple of minutes here, tell us what you found out from State Senator Don DeWitt.
Yeah, Don DeWitt's really been the Republicans' point man, or at least in the Senate GOP. He's been the point man, and has been closely involved in a lot of these conversations. And there have been some alternative ideas pushed to fund transit. Now, we don't know where the governor, or if the governor's office is really involved in this right now. Again, this is probably the big issue looming over fall veto session, and the governor's been, every day talking, as you said, Greg, about federal deployments and not focusing on what's coming in the fall veto session. But Don DeWitt told me that Senate Republicans are getting ready to propose their own legislation. It would include a tax, but a different one that would be a rideshare tax. Instead of the pizza tax, which is so unpopular, that wasn't going to get out of the House, this was what DeWitt said, a fairer model to use Uber and Lyft statewide to fund downstate transit instead of the pizza tax just for Chicago transit. And another possibility for funding would come from the state's rainy day fund, because DeWitt said organized labor agreed to allow interest from road fund dollars to be used for the fiscal cliff. So why shouldn't the governor take that $3 billion rainy day fund, use the interest collected off that fund to help close this gap and address the fiscal cliff in a sustainable way? So those were ideas out there, aside from the unpopular, again, retail delivery tax and the real estate transfer tax that were pushed but did not get through the Illinois House. And DeWitt said they wouldn't get through the Illinois House.
And again, something we'll be watching very closely come the last 2 weeks of October. 6 days, legislators will be in Springfield, and the Center Square staff will be on top of that. Be sure to get the newsletter in your inbox at thecentersquare.com. One last thing here, Jim, and we got 90 seconds. Here's a quote from the governor late last week. He was asked about the idea of splitting the state in two, or counties from Illinois joining Indiana, and he said, look, if you want to leave the state, I would like you to stay. I'd like you to get involved and make it a better place by working together with us. But if you want to leave, then get up and move. How do you think this is going to play out, those comments, in the 2026 gubernatorial election?
Well, I certainly can picture a campaign ad being including that quote, and then perhaps following that, either a graphic or a video of moving trucks and people actually leaving. Perhaps that didn't quite come out quite as the governor might have liked. It certainly was no olive branch to people in the 33 counties who have voted to leave Illinois. That's nearly a third of the state's counties, by the way. They want either their own state to be split off. So nothing seems to be being done at the governor's level or at the legislative leadership level to address the concerns of the people in those counties and others who feel similarly.
It's pretty remarkable. And again, you can find that story at thecentersquare.com. Thanks for joining us today, Jim. Listeners can keep up with all of these and more, again, at thecentersquare.com.